Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So this is the third lecture in this series on the great master Sri Ramakrishna. It is a biography, a very comprehensive biography, originally written in 5 parts, published in 5 parts by Swami Sharadanandji in Bengali, which is titled Shri Shri Ramakrishna Leela Prasanga. Leela Prasanga literally means the divine play. And a few minutes ago, about half an hour ago, I was talking to Revered Swami Chetananandji Maharaj over Skype, and he is the translator of this biography, which is now published as Sri Ramakrishna and his Divine Play. The original translation in English, the original book was translated once, as we discussed the history behind the translation, how Swami Jagadanandji translated it from Bengali, and Swami Shardanandji himself attempted to translate it, but he was so busy because he was having a major responsibility as the General Secretary of the Ramakrishna Order. And apart from his administrative responsibilities, he also had to look after Holy Mother's uh, the Holy Mother's construction of Holy Mother's house, which is known as Mayarbadi or Udbodhan house, for which he had taken a loan. And to repay this loan, he wrote this book in installments and then published it with the hope that whatever income he can get, he can pay off the installments the loan he had taken to build a permanent house for Holy Mother. And Holy Mother Sri Sharda Devi, we all know that in spite of, after the passing away of Sri Ramakrishna in 1886, it was not before 1910 that she had a place to stay for, her own place to stay. She was staying in different places. It is so unfortunate that in spite of the efforts, because these monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna were not having that capacity to raise that kind of money to build a small house for her. And Kamar Pukur and Jairam Bhatti, of course, she could stay there. Now and then she used to go and stay there. That was her house. But there were some difficulties in those days. And plus, the devotees wanted Holy Mother. She was the guiding force, not only behind the devotees, but also the Ramakrishna Sangha. So her presence was necessary in Kolkata, but she had no fixed place to stay. So a loan was taken, and finally Shardanandji built this Udbodhan or Mother's house where she stayed, and that is where he wrote this Leela Prasanga. He had to fulfill his responsibilities as the administrative head of the Ramakrishna order started by Swami Vivekananda, which he did till the last. And at the same time, he had to look after the retinue of Holy Mother, because a lot of people stayed there with Holy Mother. And not only that, there were a lot of poor people in the area, old women, especially old women, who had nowhere else to go, and they used to come and now and then explain their problems, and Maharaj Swami Shardan used to try to solve them whenever he could. And he even kept accounts of their little savings, which they kept with him in fear of being taken away by their relatives. So they came, and these old women used to come and innocently ask Swami Shardanji if they can, because in those days there was no banking system, and even if banks were there, these old women were illiterate. They felt that the money is secure. So he had to keep an account of all those things. He never denied anything, and he kindly agreed to take responsibility of their money, and whenever they wanted, they used to come to him. So all such duties, in spite of being so busy, he managed to sit whenever he got spare time, and he sat in a very small room, which was so small that it appeared as if that room was it's something like he used to say, I'm a watchman of Holy Mother. So even watchmen will have better place, a bigger room to stay or to guard the building. So he used to sit near the door so that he can keep an eye on the people coming in. So he had to be there, and all the time he was very alert, and at the same time doing his duties as a general secretary of the Ramakrishna order, and solving all the problems, administrative problems, going for meetings now and then. But at the same time, used to look after everything concerning Holy Mother, and at the same time, whenever he got spare time, in the midst of that crowd, it's a very crowded place, so much of noise and other things. So it's not a environment where one can write a book of such importance, such great importance, a monumental work which he did, wrote those 5 volumes sitting there. So it is something which he could do only through the grace of the Divine Mother. Otherwise, it was not possible. And many times he was interrupted. Maybe he was writing a passage, thinking deeply, trying to verify the accounts, different accounts given by different people, and trying to find out which is authentic. So it took a lot of time for him, and he published it serially in Udbodhan, the magazine, monthly magazine, and later on it was compiled in book form. So as we saw, we started with the 3rd volume, Guru Bhav Purvartha, because he was witness to most of the events which he has described in that volume. So it was easy for him to write. Whereas the first 2 parts he wrote later, because he had to consult a lot of people to ascertain the facts, and like a very it is a very authentic biography. And not only that, he had a medical background. He was in medical school, though he did not complete his degree. He did not become a doctor because he was attracted by the message of Sri Ramakrishna. So he left his medical studies, but he was very analytical in his approach because of his scientific background, and he could explain many things just as a lawyer would explain. His analysis, deep analysis of the various incidents known as Leela or the divine play, that is what we normally say when divine personages or divine incarnations they come. They try to uh, enact a drama, a divine play, which teaches humanity. They come down to the level of normal human beings and teach them how to transcend their animal existence or human existence and become divine, to live a life, true life of the spirit. So to raise the consciousness, these incarnations have to lower their consciousness, in the sense they have to come to our plane. That is why it is known as avataran. Avataran means coming down. So literally, it's not in the physical sense that they come from somewhere above the clouds or somewhere as it is popularly believed. But the thing is, coming down means to come to the grosser plane voluntarily, to enact the divine drama so that people understand the true significance of what a truly spiritual life is, and how to transcend the worldly existence, the gross existence, progressively, by first passing through the subtle, developing the intellect, the manomaya kosha and the higher koshas, the higher levels of consciousness, and then finally transcending it and becoming one with the pure consciousness or Satchidananda. So to understand this fact, the fact that there are people, there are incarnations, or there are prophets, there are divine people who have been commissioned, as it were, by the Lord Himself to enact this divine play. That is the essence of the 9th verse of the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which Swami Shardanand has quoted at the beginning of the book. We'll begin with that. The first verse he has quoted from the Gita. He has quoted 3 verses. The first verse is from the 4th chapter, the 9th verse, which says, Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo vetti tatvatah tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti so Arjuna. Whoever knows in true light, in the true light, my divine birth, when he says my, it means Sri Krishna, who has identified himself with the Paramatma or the Supreme Soul. Only in that state he would refer to himself as my. Whenever Sri Krishna said me and mine, it's not the Krishna, the physical form. It's Krishna, the transcendental form. The Krishna, the form of Krishna which identified himself with the Supreme Brahman. So that is what, when he says my, we should understand it that way. So my divine birth and action. Divyam Janma Karma. Janma means my divine birth and my divine actions, the divine play. Whoever knows this divine play in true light, what will happen to him? Tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti sorjuna. He will not be born again when he leaves his body. He will attain me, O Arjuna. So in Gita, several places, Sri Krishna is promising Arjuna, or through Arjuna is promising the Jiva, that whoever has touched the spirit, he is out of the game. That means he will attain transcendence. That is the idea. And then in the next the next verse he has quoted is the 11th verse. First is the 9th verse of the 4th chapter. Then he quotes the 11th verse, where Sri Krishna says, Ye yatha mam prapadyante tam tathaiva bhajamyaham mama vartmanu vartante manushyaha partha sarvashaha. Ye yatha mam prapadyante. In whatsoever way, in whichever way men approach me, human beings approach me, the Jiva approaches me. Prapadyante means approach me or worship me. Tans tataiva bhajamyaham. Even so do I reward them. Even so, I mean, if you consider God as a God with form, a deity or a saint, in whichever form you worship him, I will reward him accordingly, for it is my path alone they are following. Mana vartma anuvartante. They are following my path only. All these paths these paths are my paths, and that is why Manusha Partha means son of Pritha. Pritha is the name of Arjuna's father. So he is the son of Pritha. That's why one of his names is Partha. So Manushaha, all the people who follow different paths, ultimately they approach me in different ways, and accordingly I reward them. So as your faith, as you think, so you become. As Buddha said, whatever approach we have towards that reality, everybody has an idea of reality. For people, some people, this world is intensely real. For some people, even amongst the worldly things, there are certain things which are more real than others. For example, for a miser, money is more important than any other thing in the world. So for him, the idea of reality is money. There are other people for whom other things may be name, fame, or maybe nature. Some people are mad after nature. For them, that Prakriti is real, and that occupies their whole attention. So that is the essence of sadhana. Whatever you consider to be real, that attracts you and that makes you follow that particular path, and God rewards you accordingly. If you think science is your path, or medicine is your path, or any other profession is your path, and you think that is the goal of life, then you get rewarded by becoming a master of that subject. It's a very simple sutra, apparently very simple. But here, Sri Krishna is referring to the spiritual paths, different paths which human beings use to transcend themselves. He doesn't speak of secular paths. Those secular paths have their place and he does not deny it. So whatever we consider to be real, if we consider Brahman to be real, then we'll not be satisfied with the God, with God, with the God with forms, the deities with forms. We simply want to transcend it and attain unity with that pure consciousness, Sat Chit Ananda. But there are some other people who say we don't care for that Satchidananda because we don't know what it is. For me, this is my God, this is my deity, and he is supreme for me. He is the ruler of the world, or whatever way you consider him. He is the supreme father or the supreme mother. Whichever way you worship him, the God will appear to him in that form and reward him. That is the idea. And then finally, there is one verse which he doesn't quote from the Gita, but he has composed it himself. That is, it's a famous verse, Sarva Dharma Sthapakastvam, Sarva Dharma Swarupakaha, Acharyanam Mahacharyo Ramakrishnaya Te Namaha. So this is a wonderful salutation, and from the next class onwards, we will chant this before the class begins. Sarva Dharma Sthapakastvam, Sarva Dharma Swarupaka. O Sri Ramakrishna, salutation to you, the reinstater of all religions. Now, what do you mean? Sthapakastvam means to reinstate. Sarva Dharma Swarupaka means the embodiment of all religions. Now, this point has to be understood. He did not come to start a new religion, nor did he start a new sect. He just reinstated the essence of all religions. His simple message was, if you are a Christian, be a good Christian. Try to follow your path in a way that it really leads you beyond the world to the world of the spirit, the pure spirit. So if you are a Christian, be a true Christian. If you belong to any religion, because each religion, according to Sri Ramakrishna, follows different, it follows a path which ultimately leads to the same goal. So he has just come to reinstate in the sense, make your faith strong. So that is why, strangely, when Brahmos came, they felt they had to understand their religion perfectly, not just follow the rituals or the dogmas or all the lower things which are associated with their religion. So also people came from different religious sects, different religions, and different nationalities. They all came, and that is why he, as it were, reinstated, made one's faith in one's own religion strong. So he's the reinstater of all religions. Sarva Dharma Sthapakastvam. That doesn't mean he established all the religions. Religions which were already established, he strengthened people's faith in their own religion. And Sarva Dharma Swarupakaha. Now he is the embodiment of all religions because he himself practiced. He did not just say that these are different paths and you should tolerate each other. He didn't say these are words, superficial words which are uttered now in the name of interfaith dialogue. He said we tolerate you, we accept that, we accept only one truth and that is our religion, and we accept you, we tolerate you, we don't accept what you say, but it's okay, you just have the permission to be with us, live with us and follow your own religion, but we don't agree with you because ours is the only path. And that's why quarrels happen. At the most, you tolerate somebody unwillingly, but you don't accept all of them as true, as equally true. So there's no question of converting one from one religion to another. You can be part of all religions. At the same time, you can be part of your religion. Then you are a true follower of Sri Ramakrishna. That is what he means when he quotes the first verse from the Bhagavad Gita, the 9th verse of the 4th chapter, when he says, Janma karma cha me divyam, to understand my divine birth and the divine work or the divine leela that I have performed, you have to go a bit deeper. That is the significance of writing or publishing this, printing this verse from the Gita before he begins the discussion on the great master. And the great master among all the masters. Acharyanam Mahacharyo. There are great masters. So, masters in the sense teachers, great teachers of the world. So, he is the greatest master among all those people because he did not come to destroy, he came to fulfill and not to destroy. That is what Jesus also says in the Bible. I have come to fulfill, not to destroy. Any prophet or any great soul cannot be exclusive. If you are exclusive, if anybody is exclusive, he is not following the founder of his religion properly. They have to be all inclusive. So you take up any great prophet who has done good to humanity, you will find that somehow this idea of exclusiveness is a later creation. When the movement becomes an organization, there is a tendency. That is why Swami Vivekananda was very skeptical. He was tempted by the great organizations of the world when he came to the West and also saw the Buddhist organization in India and other Eastern countries. He was tempted, but he said, I still feel that a organization, it's good to be born in an organization, but it is not good to die. That doesn't mean that you should not physically associate yourself with any organization, but you have to transcend that organization. Then only you follow the particular prophet or the particular eternal teaching given to us by the different prophets, because they all teach eternal religions. All the true religions of the world, the truly spiritual religions of the world, point to something which is beyond. And this transcendence, if it does not come, then no matter which religion or which religious sect you follow, you are far away from the goal. So it is very, very important to understand the divine life and the message. And Swami Shardanand in this wonderful book, he has done a wonderful job by by presenting before the readers not only a very authentic life. There are a lot of biographical details, no doubt, the different incidents, but he has tried to explain the significance of each and every incident, and so that we fulfill the condition of Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, where he says Janma Karma, both his birth, divine birth, the biographical details of his life, and also karma, the work that he did, the message that he gave. So their life is their message. So you have to understand both the life and the message. For the message, we have gospel, but of course, this book also contains a lot of wonderful quotes or portions from gospel as well as other sources which Sri Ramakrishna uttered and which was recorded during his lifetime. So but in the introduction, in the beginning, which will start today, he starts with a historical perspective. He starts with a historical perspective because having traveled, before he started writing this book, you all must be aware, he was asked by Swami Vivekananda to come to England. He and Swami Abhedananda and Swami Turyananda. Of course, Trigunatitanji also went later. But Swami Shardananji was one of the few who came to London and stayed with Swamiji. In the beginning, Swamiji perhaps wanted him to carry on his Western work, knowing fully well his wonderful grasp of the Western methods of logical presentation or rationalism or a rational approach or a scientific approach because of his background of science, which was medicine. So being a medical doctor, was almost a doctor, was studying in medical college, he would have had that wonderful scientific spirit with which to approach the spiritual truths or reality. So he was asked to come, and he was one of the first to come to England. Swami Abhedananda and Sharadananda. Abhedananda, of course, went to America, and Sharadanji stayed on for some time, but suddenly Swamiji felt that he had a bigger responsibility of running the Ramakrishna mission. Swamiji knew his days are numbered. He was in a hurry to hand over the administration of an organization that he had started, the Ramakrishna mission, in safe hands. So he knew with a school mind, he never used to get agitated. Swamiji praised him for that. He said, "What kind of blood do you have? You have the blood of a cold blood of a fish." Because he never lost his temper, very calm and cool and collected. So such people are necessary if they have to administer such a big organization. You can't be extremely sentimental or emotional. You have to be level-headed. At the same time, you should possess a wonderful heart, and you should have qualities of the head, heart, and the hands. So he was efficient in all ways. So he had to come back, leaving the London work and the Western work. But he had a proper background. So when he wrote this book, perhaps he had the Western audience also in mind, because he ultimately knew this English translation would find its way to the remote corners of the earth. That is why Swami Vivekananda, when he came to England, in those days, London was the center of the whole, all the colonies, at least the colonies which were under the so-called Commonwealth now. So he knew that England is a place, or London is a place, where if we can put these ideas, universal ideas, in English, it will travel very far. So it's a wonderful machine for transmission of ideas. So he mentions that when he says this is a very fertile place, and if I sow the seeds here, they will sprout into great movements through the medium of English. So that is why when the great master was translated, you will find Swami Shardanji begins with a historical approach to Sri Ramakrishna. He doesn't just start with his birth, and usually biographies start with the birth, the divine birth and all. But before that, he wanted to establish this life, not because he was a disciple or he was devoted to Sri Ramakrishna, but he wanted to place this life, which according to Christopher Isherwood was a phenomena. So he wanted to present this phenomena in a very neutral way, in a very broad, with so many broad ideas, which would be acceptable to all the people of different nationalities, cultures, and traditions. But at the same time, he did not sacrifice the intensity or the core of Sri Ramakrishna's message, which was God realization or spiritual development. So he starts the first topic. We will take different topics. The first topic deals with the fact, a universal fact or a fact which Swami Vivekananda emphasized again and again when he compared the two civilizations or the different civilizations. He says religion is the soul of Indian life. It is at the center of Indian life. Now that, how to establish that? So the first paragraph of this great book shows that significant differences they exist between all the spiritual ideals and religious beliefs of India and those of other countries. Many countries have had their own religions, have had their own beliefs, dogmas, churches, organizations. So much of preaching has been done in the name of religion. But there is a significant difference. So at the outset, we see that Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Shardananji is explaining what is the significant difference. Now, he says from time immemorial, if you see, it has been very clear to a student of history that India has firmly committed itself. India has committed itself to most of the people in India, not all, but most of the people who were the so-called geniuses, focused their attention on one thing: how to achieve transcendental experience, transcendental realities such as God, Atman, and all those things. And hereafter, what is life of what does happen after death? Is there a life after death? And then they somehow spent all their time and energy, though they tried to master external sciences. A lot of sciences were developed. It's a very, very old history. Indian history goes back to nearly 5,000 years or more. And there were a lot of, if you see some of the excavations, excellent marvels of engineering and metallurgy, and many things were there. Not that they did not go or analyze or deepen their search into external nature. They did it, but they found that there is a more fascinating field of study, which is ultimately going to solve all our problems. It is only if we know. Somebody asked Swamiji when he was in London, you people harp, because they were full of life and energy, and they were saying, why bother about death? Anyway, it will come one day. We shall think about it later. So they said, your culture, your people, your philosophy harp so much on death. Why do you harp so much on death? Why not on life? Life is there before us. Why not enjoy it? Why do you always focus so much on death? Why is your culture so obsessed with this idea? So Swamiji says, in fact, no religion can begin. All the religions he showed in most of his lectures, the method and purpose of religion, which he delivered in London in Jnana Yoga lectures, if you see, he begins with this concept. He discusses this concept that only when the human soul, when it is tired, when it has tried everything he has in this world, still he is not satisfied. And when death approaches him, then religious ideas, religion begins, true religion begins. Not that he has to wait till he becomes old to think about or to meditate upon religion, but by then it will be too late. So one has to, so the Indian civilization, according to Shardananji, they were obsessed with this because they knew ultimately, today or sooner or later, we have to understand what this hereafter, if there is a hereafter, am I making provisions for that? Just as if we have to go on a trip, we have to go on a tour, how much preparations we have to make in advance, pack all our things, try to find out if something happens, emergency, we have to make all arrangements. But if what about the life hereafter? Are we prepared? Or one day when suddenly death approaches, we will be at a loss to find out what exactly, how do we have to deal with the life after that? Is there a life? First of all, we are not even sure what is happened. We don't go to a foreign country or go on a tour without studying about that country. You just don't plunge into any area which you do not know. You just don't go there. You make preparations, you get information, because you know this unexpected things may happen there. You have to prepare for all eventualities. So here also, the Indian civilization, according to Swami Shardanji, and it is true according to Swamiji also, they were more focused on transcendental realities such as God, Atman, hereafter, the soul, whether it is uh, an ultimate goal or what is the goal of life, what is the goal of our individual life, what is the goal of the collective life of the nation. So as a result, what happened that most of the efforts, all the great minds of this country, It's a historical fact. Nobody can deny that. The greatest minds, that is why somebody jokingly said, this monasticism has taken away, monasticism in India, of course, he went, they have taken away the best brains, the best minds from society. And that is why India suffered, because in the secular field, there were people, most of the brightest minds, like Buddha, like Ramakrishna, like Chaitanya, all the greatest minds and the greatest human beings, they followed this ultimate goal of life, of individual as well as collective national life as well, which Swami Shardanji now goes to prove that why religion or spirituality is the national, is the goal of our collective national life as well. Individually, many people have gone in different countries, but it has not become a mass movement. There have been religions, but most of the religious movements of the world, including the later religions which came to India, were some kind of was a kind of compromise. They denied the basic tenets of scriptures, which said God and mammon cannot go at the same time. Even Bible says, but Swamiji says, are you really Christians? You go back to Christianity. You are not Christians. If you value mammon more than God, then you are not a Christian, because Christ says God and mammon cannot go together. So you cannot have both things. So India had that choice to make, and she made a wise choice. That India, as a collective, or even in individual cases, but more so in the collective national life, you will find many people obsessed with this idea of the hereafter. So Swamiji doesn't say that that should be the case. For people who are not fit, he says there should be a balance. So that's why he suggested that more and more Indian people who are not capable or who do not have the capacity to transcend the world, they should rather focus on achieving excellence in the world. So you have to go from tamas to rajas, rajas to sattva. You can't jump. So that may be a mistake, but it is a historical fact that a large number of population, Indians, in the collective national life, you will find were engaged in the pursuit of the hereafter, maybe at the uh, cost of progress in the world. But she didn't mind, because Swamiji says if India lives today, it is because of her spiritual core is intact. As long as the spiritual core is intact, the longevity of that culture or nation increases. Nothing can destroy it. But if we had chosen something else, then we would have been extinct by now. He gives the example of Rome, the great Roman Empire, the great Greeks. Where are the Greeks now? Where are the Romans now? I mean, if they had continued their excellence in the external world, then but somehow Christianity came, the life of the spirit came. Now and then you will find such spiritual people like Buddha, Christ, and different prophets come at different intervals of time. According to Swamiji, it is about 500 years. And they come and then they re-establish religion. They re-establish man's faith in the spirit. And they give a warning. They give us a warning that if you are obsessed, not only individually, but collectively as a nation, if you are obsessed by material values and neglect the spirit, if there is no balance in society, then that society will vanish, because that is the nature of gross existence. Prakriti is designed in such a way that the grosser you become, the more transient and the more you go towards more and more destruction. But the higher you go, your longevity or the eternal element within us will sustain you for a longer time. So that is why Jesus spoke about the life of the spirit against the life in the world, life of matter. And because he held on to the spirit, he got eternal life. That is what he meant when he said that these people do not know what they are doing. They are crucifying a body, which is just a lump of flesh. But they can't kill my spirit because I have realized that spirit. So he held on to that spirit, and that made him eternal. That is why the message of Christ survives even now. So also the great eternal message of Krishna. But if followers dilute that message and compromise with the eternal teachings of these great prophets and say, no, we will have both God and Mammon, then we are not following the prophet. If we do not believe, we say we follow Krishna or Buddha and don't follow his teachings, then what is the use? So also here, Swami Shardananji is very particular to show that when Sri Ramakrishna was born in India, he was infused the efforts of all his predecessors, the great lineage of saints, who many of whom belong to different sects. They came and showed how to empower a sadhaka. That was, of course, a divine drama which Sri Ramakrishna enacted. So people came from the Vaishnava tradition. There are so many traditions. And to validate each path, he had to undergo all these different sadhanas. And God made arrangement and sent the respective gurus to him. And he learned from them, and finally they went away learning something from him, which their own sect had not taught them. They were not inclusive. They came with exclusive ideas, and Sri Ramakrishna not only grasped it, but then gave back something to them, telling them that this path is okay, but that doesn't mean the other path is not okay. And he followed the other path also to validate it. So that is why Sarva Dharma Sthapakastvam Sarva Dharma Swarupakaha. He is the embodiment of different paths because he practiced them. And he did not say that you follow this. So, 1 minute. Getting an echo.
Scotland Makarish. Live છે. ગરબો હોય છે પાછી. મારે મ્યુટ કરી નાખવાનું.
Yeah. Please mute your audios, otherwise I get an echo. Yes. When you join, please mute your. I have actually. Yes. So when one attempts to trace the reason, he does not just conclude by saying that running after the national collective national life was running after a spiritual career. If you may see, nowadays we are using this word career so often that everybody thinks one has to run after a career. For what purpose they don't know, but they have to run after it. And where they reach finally, that goal is also not known. So if you may use that word, the collective national life was running after a career which at least enabled them to understand the ultimate goal of life, individual life and also collective life. So now Sardhananji says, why did this happen? So he says, he has analyzed it. It's not that by chance some people got together and said that we'll have religion as our goal. Spirituality will be the goal of our country. It doesn't happen like that. It's a collective consciousness, individual consciousness when it is multiplied, and one soul inspires the other, and all of them collectively follow one particular goal. So why it has happened? So if we try to attempt to find a reason, trace a reason why this has happened. For India's acquisition of such an intense passion for these transcendental realities, if we try to analyze that, Swami Shardanji says, one finds that the only cause, one of the, not only one of the causes, but the only cause, otherwise it could have happened in other countries as well. It didn't happen because historically, or the geographic location known as India or maybe Asia, but mainly India, he says, uh, the only cause is repeated appearance of illumined souls in India. So that's why Swamiji says, as long as there are some spiritual people in each nation who hold that nation together, that is why he says India will not die if it persists in a search for the spirit, the life of the spirit. Many people did not understand it. They saw the poverty around them and they were wondering, why is not Swamiji? Of course, Swamiji asked a lot of people who perhaps were skilled and were not ready for religion to work for the secular development of the country. No doubt he encouraged that also. But that doesn't mean he encouraged everybody to run after it. He said, as long as there are some people, the repeated appearance in a country of illumined souls. So he says, if one person gets realization or he inspires a few souls around him, that is more than a regiment of preachers. So it is not enough to just preach religion, but to practice it, to internalize the thoughts and to realize the truths of those things. So that passion, that idea, not just to preach religion, not just to spread one's religion with a missionary zeal, which was never encouraged by Swamiji. Even Swamiji, when he was hesitating so much. That is why he gave the motto to the Ramakrishna mission: be and make. Don't be in a hurry to change others. First, you be yourself. First, try to realize these truths yourself. Then, if you are commissioned by the Lord, then share it with a few who come in touch with you. That is the great Indian tradition. So, Swami Shardanji here says the only reason, one reason is the intense passion for these transcendental realities and repeated appearance of these great illumined souls who did not care for anything. That is why when Swamiji in that St. George's Drive house, where Sister Nivedita heard him, maybe in his second or third talk there, and there was a small group which used to meet there, Pimlico, and St. George's Drive, that house is now having a blue plaque. So it is in that house which Sister Nivedita heard something wonderful. He says, if I get 20 people, just 20, mind you, he did not bother for a congregation or a huge gathering. He said, if I just get 20 people who can stand in the yonder street, he just pointed out, who can stand in that yonder street and say that I want nothing but God. So where are those people? He was searching, and that struck Nivedita that day, because she was intellectual herself. She was concerned with education, women's empowerment, and lot of things she was doing in London. A very highly accomplished lady. But for the first time, she heard, and she must have heard that call. It must have rung a bell in her, because it was uttered so powerfully, and Swamiji really meant it. So she decided that she should be one of those 20 at least. So at least she should try to be one of those 20. So that's why Swamiji trained her when she came to India also. When she went to India, she was very keen to start her school and secular work. He said, no, first you have to be and then you can make. You have to internalize all these ideas. You have to study Indian culture, share the passion for attaining the transcendental realities, to live a life of the spirit. If you can share that passion, you have to understand India first. It took 2 years for Nivedita. She came, she thought the methods which she had mastered in the West, the kindergarten that she ran, and all the different ways of educating a person for children, she wanted to implement. She was in a hurry to start the school. Swamiji did not allow her to start the school for at least 2 years. 2 years she observed, she studied all these wonderful things. He himself took her on a long tour of India, and that is why we have that masterpiece, the master as I saw him, and notes of some holy wanderings, notes of some wanderings with Swami Vivekananda. These are the two books which, in a brief period of say less than 2 years, of course they were not always, she was not always able to accompany Swamiji everywhere. The two major periods of her travel with Swamiji, one was through India. They went up to Srinagar and Kashmir and all the places of India, historical places, which was a great education for her to understand the national life, the collective national life. She got the idea, and then she understood what Swamiji meant, that religion is the backbone of India, spirituality is the backbone of India. And the second time was when she was traveling from India to London, to England, after which she went to America to collect some money for her Indian work, and she stayed with Swamiji. But that journey, that wonderful journey, was when Swami Turiyananji was also there. I think Swami Turiyananji and Abhedanji were there. But anyway, it was then that she came to know his inspiring words. He was always constantly inspiring her so that she could develop, she could study the mystic India, the India of the mysticism of the Indian people, and develop a firm faith and deep interest in spiritual matters. So from ancient times, we have seen India has never sacrificed this curiosity in spiritual matters. And as a result, a unique society, all the social customs and social choices that people make are based on this national ideal. So all the social customs, if you see, including that of the caste system and other things, if it is understood properly and implemented properly, was designed to create a unique society where the rules are formulated. Social rules are just formulated so that they are based on the firm ideal of spirituality. Ultimately, it should lead from brahmacharya ashram, grahastha ashram, vanaprastha, a gradual withdrawal, then you go to the sannyas, the idea of freedom, the idea of spiritual freedom. So everything, according to different temperaments, different paths were laid down based on this ultimate ideal of moksha. So mukti was our national ideal, that atmano mokshartham jagadhitaya cha. So if you keep the ideal perfect, that is what he wanted Nivedita to do. You teach everything, but don't teach these children or these girls in the school or whatever work you do, keep this ideal intact. If this spiritual ideal is intact, then your work will bear fruits. Otherwise, they will collapse. Like all secular movements, like all secular reform movements, he knew that nothing will survive. Everything will be destroyed if it is based on the worldly methods, the secular methods. So that's why she wrote, when she introduced Swamiji's complete works, in the introduction she writes, for him nothing was secular, everything was spiritual. Whether it is education, whether it is economic development, whether it is social development, social empowerment, women's empowerment, everything had to be centered around the spiritual ideal. Otherwise, he not only firmly believed, he said history shows that no matter how much you try for women's empowerment, for empowerment of the underprivileged people, equality, gender equality, there's so many movements going on. People are just fighting for their rights. Some religions believe in certain things, some religions do not believe. Do you sanction this? Who are we to sanction? All the issues will remain issues They cannot be solved on political, social, or economic with an economic basis. Because all the issues, including the caste system, he found the gender inequality that prevailed in India, and it prevails all over the world. Then there are so many other social issues which has a lot of politics involved. So politicians have been racking their brains trying to find out what is the solution. And then there comes reformers and the so-called intellectuals. They write big, big articles, and nothing changes in this world. People continue, and that will continue, Swamiji believed, unless you have a spiritual longing, unless it is only a life of the spirit. When 20 people, as Swamiji asked Nivedita, are there 20 people who can sacrifice everything and say that nothing but God exists, the eternal truth exists? If such people are there, then you will see all the social changes, everything else will be harmoniously arranged around it. That is why once he very famously said, Swamiji, in one of his letters, try to manifest the divinity within, and everything else will be harmoniously organized around it. So first manifest the divinity within. That was her. That was his advice to her. And she said, if you teach your children, the girls who come to your school, this method of empowerment, then it will be true empowerment. Spiritual empowerment, on the top of it, educational, intellectual, social, and all those things will come. So even today, Sharad Sardanji says, people strongly believe that each individual can experience God separately without the help of any church or temple or mosque. They can attain or experience God and attain union with Him by practicing austerities, self-control, and intense spiritual longing. That is what Sri Ramakrishna came to demonstrate, that God is true, a God-centered life is true, and every human being should aspire for that. If that is if more and more people undertake this effort, then society will change. All the problems around you, first the local problems will be solved, the social problems which were affecting uh, around you, nearest to you, maybe within your family, outside your family, in your locality, in the country, then you go to the entire world. There are so many global issues now. People want to solve this global issue when they cannot even solve the issues that they are facing in their own homes. So Abdul Kalam, one of very intelligent and spiritually inclined presidents of our Indian Republic, once he mentioned that if one cannot solve problems within the house, in your family, how can you expect to solve big problems of your company or society or even your country? It's far off. The solution should come from home. Charity begins at home. So you have to start this effort. That is why religion was made highly individual. In fact, organization is there just to support, just like a prop. But beyond that, we have to go beyond the organization. And each one, that's why this idea of Ishta Devata is there. You have your own God, your own experience, your own spiritual life, and you don't have to follow anybody else, or maybe you don't have to imitate anybody else. Your experience, your sadhana, your effort is your own. And whatever you do, that gain you will get. You can't expect somebody else, somebody else to do it for you. You have to cook and eat your own food. So that is the idea, that each individual can experience God. To reaffirm that faith in God and that the higher realities of life, the truth behind our life and also death, to assert that and to make it a national ideal, Sri Ramakrishna was born. So if there are some questions, let us take it up, because the second topic is almost over. So then the next topic which we'll discuss next time is the proof that India's religion is based on direct experience of God. It does not say that because Krishna says, or because Upanishad say, because Vedas say, because Quran says, because the Bible says. No, nothing. Do you have a direct experience? That is the proof. India's religion or India's spiritual culture is based on the fact, that is why it has survived, that do you have experience? Do you experience the realities which the scriptures explain in words? They are, after all, words. If you can experience, that is what Sri Ramakrishna insisted. And that's why when Vivekananda went to him and said, I have read enough of books, I don't want to another theory from you. I just want to know if you have seen God, and can you show God to me? Can you give me that experience? Have you got that experience yourself? And if you have, can you give it to me? That was his question. That is what he was after. That was his spiritual quest. So as long as this idea that religion should be based on actual experience and not on certain dogmas or certain sects, certain scriptures, even scriptures. Tatra Veda Aveda Bhavati. The Vedas are the only scriptures in the world which says throw away the Vedas. Because once you get that experience, you don't need the Vedas. It's only the people at the lower level who are groping in ignorance, they need these Vedas, but once they transcend these Vedas, then they don't need it. So one has to realize the spiritual truths and not just intellectually affirm it or intellectually study it. So that is why uh, it is very important to study Sri Ramakrishna's life in this light. That whatever he taught or whatever he preached or whatever he spoke, they were all based on his own experience, direct spiritual experience. And that is what Swami Shardanand has done in this monumental book. He has tried to explain to all of us how this is not just his opinion. It's not an intellectual opinion or a scholar's opinion. He was like a child of the University of the Mother, a student of the University of Nature. And he went to nature for facts with his wonderful devotion, his yearning. He insisted on unraveling the secrets of the spiritual world. And when what he found through his direct experience, through very, very hard work, which forms the second part of this book, Sadhana Bhav. After his childhood days, you will find intense spiritual practices which no human being would have done in one lifetime. So you will all try to understand that as we progress. We will go a bit slow. We just don't want to read and skip these paragraphs. We have to understand each and every word. Even if it takes a long time, this book is worth studying in depth, because unless we understand the great divine life of Sri Ramakrishna, there's no point in meditating or even, just meditation on him or trying to worship him will not bear fruit. It has to be combined with a Janma Karma Cha Me Divyam, Me Divyam. Krishna says, try to understand. He's telling Arjuna, try to understand my divine Janma, my divine birth, and my divine actions, which led to spiritual growth, which led to spiritual realizations. So to understand it and then accept it only if we are convinced, that is what Swami Shardananji wants us to do. And he takes us through this wonderful journey of the Leela Prasang to show us that religion means realization. So if there are some questions, I will just try to. You can mention, type it in the chat, or I shall conclude. I think there are no questions. Today I was talking with Swami Chetananandji, who has translated the Leela Prasang again for modern readers, because in a language which is more current now than the Victorian English of the great master. So he was telling it was such a wonderful experience and how difficult it was to take up each Bengali word and translate it into English. That itself, for years he struggled. That would have been a very, very wonderful experience, because we read, just casually read the great master. He would have had to understand each word, meditate on it, and then translate it. So sometimes it is good if you translate certain books. It helps a lot. Anyway, so I don't think there are any questions. Yes. Yes. Do and speak as you preach. All depends on real experiences. Yes, definitely. If it doesn't depend on real experiences, not that every time or every word that is spoken is based on real experiences. Sometimes it is based on the Vedic experiences of the Vedic rishis or Upanishadic rishis or the Bible. So it begins with Shraddha, a faith in the scriptures. That has its own place. You can't just have the experience just because we wish that we should have experiences. But we should not stop till we get the experience. That is the idea. That doesn't mean that you should not read or you should not even talk about these things. These things have to be uh, initiated first by a working faith. It should start with a simple faith that since these utterances historically certain prophets have whose impact has been felt all over the world, you have to see that also, how impactful are the teachings of that particular prophet. And once having ascertained that, one has to struggle hard to just try to understand. That is why we are reading this Leela Prasang. Not that if you don't experience what Shardananji did, it is of no use. No, that gives us an incentive to practice what we read, what we hear, what we speak. Everything is very good. The first stage is to listen, to think. Shravana, Manana, then Nididhyasana, then internalization of those things. So it depends on real experiences till you have them. If you have real experiences, then the words become powerful. When Sri Ramakrishna spoke, and so when Swamiji spoke and others spoke, later we also speak, everybody speaks, but there is a huge difference. When Sri Ramakrishna spoke, it convinced the person instantly, because he did not speak anything that was not part of his experience. So somebody asked Swami Shardananda, because they did not see any achievement or any great spiritual states in him as Sri Ramakrishna demonstrated. So they were a little hesitant. They said, have you experienced all these things? Why are you writing this? How could you write this? How did you know this? What is Bhavamukha and all? Then he said, it's not just written intellectually. He said, there is not a single line here which I have not experienced myself. So that shows how authentic this book is. So he had to struggle by the grace of the Holy Mother, and also Thakur. Holy Mother was alive, so he till she passed away, till she entered into Mahasamadhi, he was possessed by a strange force, a strange power that made him write this. So he would have had this vision, otherwise he would not have told that I have not recorded anything which was not a matter of my own experience. Yes. Now, another, how did which avatar compromise and was so ruined? Swamiji says so in Complete Works, page 271. I'll have to see the references, volume 8. I don't know in what context you are asking this, but some avatars, I mean, they did not compromise, but the followers who came later on, they diluted the message. That happens in all avatars. It's not just one particular avatara. Whenever, as that's why avatars have to come again and again. So when Buddha came 500 years later, when they tried to compile his teachings, it had already been diluted. So some of the people of the Sangha, the leaders of the Sangha said, what is this? This is not what Buddha said. How come it has changed so much? But in 500 years, many things change. So that is how it's not a question of compromise. They don't do it willingly, but the circumstances. If suppose you find that some person who is coming and says, no, if this is the religion, I don't want. But if you want numbers, then you have to compromise. Then slowly the compromise starts with that. If you are keen to have more followers, you will say, okay, I'll speak something which is very pleasant for you. That is how religion degraded, even in India. It's not that all cultures, all countries, all prophets were, first of all, they were misunderstood when they were born. Otherwise, nobody would have crucified Jesus. Nobody would have criticized Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sometimes they came to beat him also. So these things would not have happened if they were understood. First of all, they were not understood during their own times. But even after that, after they were accepted, they were understood, their impact was felt, gradually, with the passage of time, you will find that some kind of compromises are very natural. So you cannot blame the Avatara for that, or you cannot blame the prophet for that. They came, they delivered a message, they went away. Now it is for the followers to understand, to internalize. That is why we take so much pains to understand. First of all, we have to read to understand, to read, to internalize, to think, to argue, to discuss. Then these things become part of us. Then the chances of compromise or the chances of dilution or the chances of misunderstanding are less. But if we don't read or don't even try to understand the divine message, then we have no right to be called as followers of a particular prophet. It may not be Sri Ramakrishna alone. If I say I am a follower of Christ, then I should be able to prove that I follow everything what Christ said to the last letter. If I cannot do it, I can say that I am trying, but I know that is the ideal. But I can't say that Christ allowed all these things. I can't say the Upanishad said, no, you can enjoy God as well as Mammon at the same time. Have your share of the world, and at the same time, God will come and at the last moment, he will take you by his hand to his blissful abode. That's not going to happen. And if such people are there, that is what is compromise means. We compromise because we expect, we don't normally get people. If you make things tough, that's why Swamiji talked of a creative minority. A creative people are always will be and are in a minority. They are in a minority and they will always be in a minority, because it is a tough. All people do not become Nobel laureates, even in the secular field. So one has to be committed and understand. And avatars do not compromise, but the need of the age or the misunderstanding which the disciples had, they take certain, it has happened in all religions, they take certain quotes and to suit their own wishes and desires and selfish interest, they will twist it. They'll say, oh, Jesus said this, or Upanishads say this, the Vedas say this. And then you bring it to your level rather than raising yourself to that level. But anyway, I'll check up this 8th volume, as you said, Complete Works, page 271. And in my next class, I will answer that. Okay. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.